Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs. Today's episode is called Anniversary Albums. I'm going to be talking about some of the albums that had a significant anniversary in the month of October. Now, for the purposes of this show, a significant anniversary will be one where the year ends in a 5 or a 0. So it was really hard to knock this down to the list that I do have. I've kept it down to 7 albums that I'm going to be talking about today, but there really were a lot more that I could have talked about. So the first album I'm going to talk about is this one, the Monkees' self-titled debut. It turned 55 this month. It was released originally on the 10th of October 1966. Now, I know a lot of people like to give the Monkees crap, say they weren't a real band and they didn't play their instruments on the album and so on and so on. Some of that may or may not be true. I mean, they didn't play on most of these songs, but then again, people hail the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds as a masterpiece, and rightly so. And the Beach Boys played very, very little of the instrumentation on that album either. But for me, this album is just a wonderful slice of cheerful 60s pop music, and it's really good 60s pop music. So I love the Monkees. I'm trying to collect all of their albums. I have most of the 60s ones. I'm getting there. The next album I want to talk about had its 45th anniversary this month, and that is Johnny the Fox by Thin Lizzy. It was released originally on the 16th of October 1976. I don't have every Thin Lizzy album. I'm trying to, again, collect all the Thin Lizzy that I can, but some of that stuff's quite expensive to get on vinyl. But of the Thin Lizzy that I own and the Thin Lizzy that I've heard in the past and that I know, this might just about be my favourite Thin Lizzy album. It's probably either this one or Black Rose. Really good hard rock album. Always enjoyed this album. The next album I want to talk about is one that might not be for everybody who's watching this, but I grew up in the 80s, so I have an unashamed love for 80s music. I know a lot of people who like the hard rock and the metal and the prog like to sneer at sort of 80s synth pop and that sort of thing. But it's some of the music that I grew up on, so I still really enjoy it. And a seminal synth pop album came out on the 16th of October 1981, and that is Dare by the Human League. Now, I have to admit, my favourite Human League albums are the first two, which are far more experimental than this one. This one was the one that made them superstars because it had the big #1 hit, Don't You Want Me, on it. And I have to say, for my taste, that is the weakest song on this album. This album, I think, is definitely going in a more pop direction, but I think it still has some of the experimental sound that the first two albums had. Not to the same extent by any stretch, but I think there's enough of it there to keep this interesting. And I do have to say, for my personal taste, for the Human League, it was kind of all downhill from here. Yeah. Now, making another sort of radical change in genre here, the next album I'm going to talk about is just celebrating its 5th anniversary. It was originally released on the 21st of October 2016, and it is the last album released in the lifetime of Leonard Cohen, and it is You Want It Darker. Now, much like David Bowie's Black Star earlier in 2016, this album is definitely Leonard Cohen's death album. He's talking about his impending demise a lot on this album. But because it's Leonard Cohen, there's a lot of humour, wry humour, dark humour in the lyrics. I think this is actually one of Leonard Cohen's very best albums, period. Much as I do with David Bowie's Black Star. Black Star is a top 3 David Bowie album for me. This might be a top 3 or top 5 Leonard Cohen album for me. I think it's a wonderful, haunting album. The next album I want to talk about is having its 45th anniversary in the month of October. It was originally released on the 25th of October 1976, and that is Big Beat by Sparks. Now this one is in a period where Sparks weren't going as commercially well as they had a little earlier in the decade, or as they would a little later in the decade. This is very much in their sort of arty power pop period, that there's sort of the first period of their career. I did a video with Marco from the Contrarians. It's Patreon only at the moment, so go and become a patron of the Contrarians if you'd like to see it, where we talked about Sparks throughout the decades. I didn't actually speak specifically about this one, but this one is definitely the most power pop of those early albums. Lots more guitar on this album than there are on some of the previous ones. Really good rock and roll album with that typical quirky Sparks humor in the lyrics. Now the next album I want to talk about is having its 35th anniversary in the month of October, and it is one of my favourite albums of all time. I may do a standalone video on it at some stage. Although I find it very hard to decide what my favourite album by this band is. This was released on the 27th of October 1986 and is Skylarking by XTC. Produced by Todd Rundgren. Apparently the sessions were very difficult because Andy Partridge and Todd Rundgren were constantly butting heads. I think Andy Partridge described it as one bunker, two Hitlers. But this album is just so beautiful, and it's lush and it's pastoral, and every song on it is just absolutely gorgeous. It's got to be a top 3 XTC album. Quite where I would put it in that top 3, I'm not entirely sure, and it probably would change from day to day, but it is a fantastic album. And I'll finish off this episode with an album that's having its 50th anniversary on Halloween on the 31st of October. Originally released 31st of October 1971, and that is Metal by Pink Floyd. Now I know a lot of casual Pink Floyd fans don't really know their catalogue prior to Dark Side of the Moon. And that's really a shame, because there's some wonderful music on those early Pink Floyd albums, and this one's no exception. I mean, it starts off with possibly a wonderful song for your Halloween playlist, which is One of These Days. Some of the songs in the middle are good but not great, sort of things like Fearless and Saint-Tropez. Seamus is a bit of a throwaway. But then on side 2 you get the sidelong epic Echoes, and I think that is one of Pink Floyd's masterpieces. Such a gorgeous piece of music. Again, very haunting. The strange seagull sounds that Dave Gilmour gets out of his guitar in the middle part of that song are just kind of creepy, but they're really wonderful. And the sonar ping at the beginning that Rick Wright got off his electric piano is just a wonderful atmospheric start to the track. But the whole track is just beautiful. The lyrics by Roger Waters are really, really good. It's a great album, and if you don't know this album, if you've never really listened to Pink Floyd before Dark Side of the Moon, that's a wonderful album. So those are the anniversary albums that I'm talking about today for the month of October. in the comments below, if there's any anniversary albums from October that I missed that you think I should have talked about, please leave them in the comments below. Tell me what you think about these albums, which ones you like, which ones you don't like. If you haven't heard any of these albums before, then please go to your music listening app of choice and give them a spin. Please like, share and subscribe. It really helps a young channel like mine out. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again in the next video.